Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to Dr. Singh's podcast, and today we are going to talk about the HPV vaccination drive, which is launched by the Indian government to inject 12 million girls with the claim that they're going to prevent them from cervical cancer. And to speak on the subject, we have a very honorable guest, the author of Vaccine Amen, the religion of vaccines. So welcome to the show, none other than Mr. Aaron Siri. Welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, doctor.
Thank you so much. So before we jump into the questions, let us know our audience. Are you a medical doctor or immunologist or biologist or something of that sort?
No, I'm not a virologist, vaccinologist, immunologist, or medical or infectious disease doctor. I'm an attorney, but I have litigated vaccines for over a decade. And when I go to court with regards to the vaccines, I don't get to rely on titles. I don't get to say I'm an MD and MPH or just believe me. I have to actually prove all the claims I make about vaccines with evidence.
Right. So first thing first, is the HPV vaccine safe and effective? Let's talk about effectiveness first because they claim that they're going to prevent cervical cancer. So based on the data, those who took the HPV shot and those who did not take the HPV shot, who has more cancer and less cancer? Let us know about that.
Well, so I actually have there's a whole footnote about the efficacy that involves the efficacy of HPV vaccine in my book. And what I show is that the time period before the HPV vaccine, cervical cancer deaths were declining, okay, rapidly. And that after the introduction of the HPV vaccine, the decline did continue, but not as rapidly, okay? Meaning there's a historical trend already because if you detect the cells starting to change early enough, you can prevent cervical cancer. That's why they have pap smears. And as pap smears became more common, as those types of interventions, so did mortality from cervical cancer. So the introduction of the Gardasil vaccine based on the data I lay out in my book, and it's right there. You could look at it. It's official data. It does not reflect that the introduction of the cervical cancer vaccine, HPV vaccine, accelerated the decline in cervical cancer. If anything, it slowed it down. But of course, as they always do with vaccines, if any decline after they introduce it, always the vaccine. They never even look what was going on before the vaccine, so.
Right. We will discuss this in detail when we come to the other vaccines that are given to the children. But about the efficacy, let's be a little more clear. So I'm talking about the control. Like, for example, those who took the HPV shot and those who did not take the HPV shot, who is getting more cancer or less cancer? Is there any data?
Oh, you mean in the clinical trial for the
Right.
vaccine? Oh, nobody knows because they didn't actually track the young boys and women and girls long enough to actually compare the cervical cancer rate between the groups. They just used what they considered basically a correlate of protection, some markers of change. So whether or not it actually reduces cervical cancer was never, ever established in the clinical trial for this product. What you can see in that trial, though, are a whole host of harms caused by the product.
Right. And now that's where we come on the safety part of it. So please let us know, is the vaccine safe?
I mean, if you mean safe as in it doesn't cause serious injury, no, it is not safe. That vaccine can cause very serious injuries, including many that were ignored in the clinical trial, as reported by Slate magazine, which is a very pro publication as well. And even if you look at the underlying data from the clinical trial, forget the stuff they hid. Just the clinical trial data reflects the product's not safe. And I'll just give you one example. So in this clinical trial, one group, about over 10,000, got the then experimental unlicensed Gardasil 4 vaccine, okay? Now, since there was no licensed Gardasil vaccine, there was no licensed HPV vaccine, you would expect that the control group, the group that didn't get the vaccine, would get something inert, like a saline injection, like they do when they do clinical trials of drugs. Why? Because you want to give one group the novel potential product, in this case, the potential Gardasil 4 vaccine, one group that gets something that you know is completely safe, and then you track them for a few years, and you look at the difference. What's the difference in the rate of autoimmunity, immunological issues, neurological issues, dysautonomia? Go down the list. Cancer, right? Here, however, instead of giving the control group something inert, like a saline injection, they gave them, you can't make this stuff up, they gave them an injection of the aluminum adjuvant, of the active ingredient that's specifically intended to cause an immune reaction. They injected the control group with 250 or 500 micrograms of that neuro and cytotoxic substance. Aluminum adjuvant, as used in these products, is actually specifically used to induce autoimmunity in lab animals. There is an endless line of studies showing its neuro and cytotoxic effects and its ability to induce various systemic autoimmune reactions. And you want to hear the craziest part? Here's the craziest part. Anybody who wants can go and pull up the FDA package insert for Gardasil 4. Go to the FDA's website. You can pull it up. Go to Table 9. And what you'll see on Table 9 is that the group that got the Gardasil vaccine, right, totally healthy women and children, within 6 months, developed a suspected systemic autoimmune related disorder. 2.3%. That's about 1 in 40 something. That's incredibly high. Could you imagine if every 6 months, every single healthy woman and a teenager who's female developed a systemic autoimmune disorder? The whole population would have a serious systemic autoimmune disorder within, over the course of their lifetime. But the reason it didn't raise alarm bells is that the control group, which got the aluminum adjuvant, which causes autoimmunity, okay, also had 2.3% of them had a suspected systemic autoimmune disorder. So for the purposes of FDA's licensure process, because the experimental group with 2.3% and the control group with 2.3% were similar, that's deemed safe from a regulatory perspective. Obviously, not safe by any logical thinking, caring, rational standard, but safe by the FDA standard is because it assumes that the control, the injection of 250 or 500 micrograms of aluminum adjuvant, is safe, and it's absolutely not. So that's just one example. There's a lot of those issues that I could point out from the clinical trial that reflect its safety problems. I could also just talk about the clients my firm represents of young boys and girls, as well as women and men who are seriously injured by this product.
Mm-hmm. Right. So before I ask a follow-up question, I just wanted to ask, my video just got blurred. Is it coming blurred on your side?
I see you as blurred, yes.
Can you ask the technical person, like what exactly is the reason?
Michael? So it's probably still recording clearly on his end. Yes. So when you get the final recording, it shouldn't be blurred, Michael is saying.
All right, that's fine then. I'll ask the
Okay.
follow. I'll ask the
Sure.
follow-up question. Okay, so when you said that there were 2.3% serious side effects in the vaccinated group, and the control group also received the adjuvant, which is aluminum and which is a neurotoxin thing, and that also triggers autoimmunity. This means that the vaccine was never really tested against a pure placebo to demonstrate the real safety.
No, it was never. Right. And by the way, the 2.3%, just to be clear, that's not all serious adverse events in the trial. That's only systemic autoimmune disorders. It is for one category. That doesn't reflect neurological issues. that doesn't reflect neurological issues, that doesn't reflect cardiovascular issues, that doesn't reflect any of the other issues that the product could cause. It was just that one narrow immune-related issue. And yes, there was no control group that received an inert injection in the Gardasil 4 trial.
Right. Here's a question. In the package insert, I can see three columns. One says Gardasil injection, the other says aluminum control, and the third says saline placebo. So that actually says saline placebo, but I read in the book that you say it was not really a saline placebo, and there's something going on within that. So, but I couldn't find it. I mean, like on the Gardasil package anywhere, or in the footnotes, nowhere around there.
Right. So in the sentence where I say that, you can go to the footnote. And what it pulls up is the actual underlying clinical reports, hundreds of pages, right? And in there, it describes what the quote-unquote saline placebo was. It was not just a saline placebo. It had saline in it, but it was not a saline placebo, which is what you think of it. When I think of it, means just saline. What that had was every single thing in the vial, including yeast proteins, all kinds of everything, except the antigen and the aluminum adjuvant. So it was the entire carrier solution and all the components. When they call it saline solution, they're just being deceptive. It's just not true. And their own documents prove it. Here's the other part of this, okay? The group that got Gardasil was over 10,000. The group that got the injection of aluminum adjuvant was over 10,000 girls and women. The group that got this supposed saline placebo, which it wasn't, was only a few hundred girls. Only a few hundred. So, by the way, what's that?
300 something.
Yes. Now, here's the interesting thing, okay? Here's something super interesting. You said there were 3 columns. Now, that's true in Table 1. In Table 1, when they looked at just like, did your arm hurt a little? Of course your arm's going to hurt. You just got a needle stuck in it. How stupid. Okay? Yeah, sure. It hurt. Good job. Great study. Okay, and they split it into 3 groups. The group that got Gardasil, the group that got the aluminum adjuvant injection, and the group that got the fake placebo injection, saline injection, okay? But then when you go to Table 9, did it have 3 columns? No. They took and they combined the aluminum adjuvant over those 10,000 and the few hundred quote-unquote saline placebo. And you got to ask yourself why. And what the data reflect is that among those few hundred, because they weren't getting an aluminum adjuvant injection, they might have had a 0% systemic autoimmune rate. And so that doesn't look good. So mush it together with the aluminum adjuvant group, and you get the number that you need.
Right. So this is being deceptive and manipulative. So how do they have the audacity to do such things? I mean, like, how can they blatantly lie on the insert that we tested it against a placebo and then they merge the columns? I mean, like, are they not liable for these?
The FDA would have to hold them accountable. The question that you're really asking is, how in the world could the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that is the agency in the United States responsible for licensing new products, how in the world did they let Merck get away with this? And I will tell you the reason is that, unfortunately, sadly, there are many divisions in the FDA. Some of them involve drugs, some involve radiological products, some of them involve, there's an endless number. And there's one division that involves vaccines, okay? Biologics, and they have a subcomponent. And those folks, from what I gather, are basically vaccine zealots. They are what I call the vaccine amen. They just assume these products are safe. They're not focused on safety, in my opinion. They're focused just on efficacy. And every single person in that division of the FDA that has been involved in licensing any of the routine childhood vaccines, in my opinion, should all immediately be fired. Because they have, for the last 30 years, been licensing childhood vaccines in the United States based on clinical trials that are one after another completely defective or categorically unable to have shown they were safe before the FDA licensed them and unleashed them on millions of children in the US, and then often other countries around the world follow the FDA's lead, So basically unleashing them on the children of the world. As I lay out in my book, all cited to FDA sources, every single routine injected childhood vaccine was licensed based on a clinical trial that had no placebo control group, not a single one. I know that that's called false information, it's called whatever, but that is the reality from the FDA's own documentation. I cite the underlying actual FDA clinical trial related documentation for every vaccine in my book in chapter 10. Anybody who doubts it should read it. Even if they had a control, there's another problem with all those trials. Even if there was a placebo control group, they often only reviewed safety for days or weeks. That's ridiculous. Or maybe up to 6 months like they did in this Gardasil trial. That's patently insufficient, especially when you're vaccinating a baby. How are you going to know what developmental issues this baby has? Neurological, immunological, those won't be diagnosed or come up for years later. So even if you had a placebo control group, the trials are still typically completely useless because the safety review is not sufficient. I'll give you an example. There's 2 Hep B shots in the United States licensed for newborns. Recombavax HB and Engerix B. They're probably similar in other countries too, just different brand names. Recombavax HB was licensed based on a clinical trial that reviewed safety for 4 days after injection, monitored it for 4 days. The other one, Engerix, Recombavax B was 5 days. Sorry, I shorted it by a day. Engerix B was 4 days. Either way, ridiculous. So even if they had a placebo control, it was completely useless to assess safety. You're giving a newborn baby and you're going to review safety for 5 days, 4 days. But even if those trials, by the way, had a placebo control and they reviewed safety long enough, there's another problem that these trials almost all have. They don't have enough kids in them. They're not properly powered. That clinical trial for Recombavax HB had 147 kids. That's laughable. You can't detect almost anything with that number. So, Gardasil actually, when you look at clinical trials, ironically, was more robust than most clinical trials. It had over 10,000 kids that got the shot. It had almost 6 months of safety review. There was one little trial that even went on longer. But it had no proper control group. So you had no proper baseline of safety. But at least they kind of tried to do the other two a little bit. So I guess we give it credit for that.
Right. So if I try to summarize the information that you just said, is it true? Let me know if it's true. Not even a single vaccine is safe because none of the vaccines underwent a pure placebo-controlled trial with adequate participants for sufficient period of time to detect safety and efficacy. Is that correct?
What would be correct to say, based on the clinical trials, is that not a single routine injected childhood vaccine was validated as safe in its clinical trial. Not a single one. And you can also add to that statement. So that statement is categorically true. And you can add to that statement by saying that for many of the trials, the data that was gathered, if you look at it objectively, if you look at it with a non-FDA, regulatory standard, but actually really, really trying to assess is it safe, reflect there are very serious safety issues based on, when I look at the data, for example, this Gardasil trial with the 2.3%. I'll give you one other example, just as an example. The very first the very first pneumococcal vaccine licensed in the United States, Prevnar 7, and you can't make this stuff up, but it's a fact, was licensed based on a clinical trial in which the control group received another experimental vaccine. So they licensed a new vaccine that never existed, for which there were no existing vaccines for those diseases. They should have easily been able to use a saline placebo. Instead, they used another experimental vaccine. For anybody who's hearing that may sound crazy, and you might be saying that cannot be true. I implore you, go to the FDA website. I have a link in the book. You can go read it for yourself in the FDA documents. Now, that's bad. But then it gets worse. Because Prevnar 7, that vaccine that was licensed in an improper trial, You had no idea how safe it was because it was compared to another experimental vaccine. Completely ridiculous. Was then used as the control to license Prevnar 13. And in that clinical trial, they actually reviewed safety for 6 months. And what they found is that during those 6 months, in previously completely healthy babies, because this vaccine is given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age, within 6 months, 7 to 8% of those babies had a serious adverse event. A serious adverse event, if you go to the FDA definition, is something very serious. It means death, hospitalizations, permanent disability. It's a very serious thing. You would think that when the FDA got the data for Prevnar 13's trial, alarm bells would have gone ballistic. They would have said, holy cow, 7, 8%. That's a problem. Because Prevnar 7, we don't actually know how safe it is because we didn't do a proper trial. By the way, the FDA's own scientists admitted that in a different paper that I quote in my book. Heads should have exploded. Instead, what did FDA do? It said, well, 7, 8%, pretty similar, safe for the purposes of licensure. Not safe by any other standard, but for the purposes of licensure. Right. Then it gets worse. Then when they went to license essentially PCV 15, so 15 valent, they compared it against PCV 13. This time, in 6 months, 8 or 9% of the kids had a serious adverse event. Well, again, very similar. FDA licensed it again. This is the kind of nonsense that goes on at the FDA. This is why I make the very strong statement, I admit, it's an extraordinarily strong statement when I say that every single person in the FDA's vaccine division should be immediately fired for cause. That's my opinion, based on the clinical trials that they relied upon to license routine injector childhood vaccines. Because they're completely conflicted. At this point, what are they going to do? They're going to say, hey, you know what, America, sorry, we messed up. The now 29, as of the beginning of 2025 here, injections that a baby gets on or before their first birthday, we license almost all of those without any proper clinical trial.
Right.
To admit that is destructive personally to those individuals, to their institution. They're not going to do it, which is why they all got to go.
Right. 7 to 8% would be like, say, if 1,000 baby gets that, 70 to 80 of them get serious life-threatening conditions. Wow. And they license it safe and effective.
Yes, safe and effective.
Yeah. Vaccines.
Well, that's all they want you to do, doctor, is don't think, stop thinking, don't read, don't look at the data, just say safe and effective and take the shot, and that's it, don't think.
And even
believe. They want you to believe, which is why I call my book Vaccines, Amen. Because it is really a religion. You know, and that's what I uncovered over the last 10 years, which is I didn't go into this thinking like, oh, vaccine's bad. I didn't know. I just had the same view everybody else, which is, I guess everybody would die without vaccines. I don't know. I didn't think about it. But then over 10 years of litigating hundreds of lawsuits against federal and state health agencies, deposing the world's leading vaccinologists, what I found is that when you take their claims, like this is the most thoroughly studied product before licensure, this is the most thoroughly studied product after licensure, everybody would die without them. They prevent transmission. And when their back is against the wall on those claims in a federal lawsuit, and they have no choice but either to put up the evidence or admit they don't have it, or admit that the truth is, you find out that most of what you're told, they're just beliefs, they're myths, that the facts are contrary to those beliefs.
And here's the cognitive dissonance. When we present the evidence and the fact to the medical doctors in India or anywhere around the world, even if they look at the facts, I mean, like, I don't know why they can't wrap their head around that, and they still start defending the vaccines and then vaccines, amen. Can you just let us know what's the mentality that's going around? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the claim that you don't believe in vaccines, or you take issue with vaccines, has become synonymous with you're a bad person, you're not smart, you're unscientific, you are, pick your pejorative. And it's hard for people, they have a self-schema. Most people, they think of themselves in a certain way. In particular, doctors. Not every doctor, but most doctors and lawyers. Same thing with lawyers. They, a lot of what they do is project confidence. And they have a self-schema that's tied around, having a certain view. Mm-hmm. To come to the realization, to have to admit, wait, you told me it's the most thoroughly studied products for licensure, but the FDA documentation shows that's not true. You told me vaccines don't cause autism, that you have the studies, but when you were sued, you couldn't give any studies for the vaccines in the first 6 months of life. That causes incredible cognitive dissonance because it makes a lot of people go, well, holy crap, well, what else can't I trust? Does that mean I can't trust anything? And what I often tell people is this: vaccines are unique. They really are unique in the following way. There is no other product, none, where I cannot sue the company in America to say, hey, look, and this is true of many other countries around the world. Had you made this product safer, my kid wouldn't be dead.
Right.
My kid wouldn't be seriously injured. This law has created the perverted universe that vaccines exist in, because for the last 40 years, this law was passed in 1986 in the US and around the same time in many other countries around the world. This law has given the pharma companies unfettered ability to promote their product with no pushback. In 1986 in the United States, and this is true again of many countries around the world, a child following the CDC schedule got 3 injections on or before their first birthday. That's it, 3 injections. A child following the CDC schedule today, as of beginning of 2025 in the US, I should say, got 29 injections. It's now down to 19 injections with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in office. Okay, so we're down. We're still far from 3, but we're down from 29 to 19. Okay. Every single one of those products was licensed by a pharma company, except for one, knowing it would not be responsible for the deaths and injuries that it caused. What effect did that have? The effect it had was incredibly consequential. Why? Most companies, all companies, want to make money. If you own stock, if you had a company, what do you want it to do? You want it to make money or lose money? You want it to make money. Okay. So what does a company do? It typically conducts itself in a manner that will make money. And for most products, if it has to pay for injuries, it has an economic self-interest to make sure the product's safe before license and after it goes to market. You think cars are safer, planes are safer, home building products, ovens, you name it, are safer because of the government?
I trust planes, I trust cars, I trust chairs, I trust tables.
It's because of the free market. It's because of the economic self-interest. These companies don't want to lose money. They don't want to get sued. They don't want to be held accountable. But with vaccines, they don't have that. They don't have to worry about that. So when they're designing the clinical trials, that's why they do it. When their folks are sitting there, why would they do a trial that takes longer, that could show safety issues, that's less likely to license? They're not responsible for the injuries anyway. That's just the way business works. With drugs, they often do multi-year placebo-controlled trials. Why? Because they're altruistic, because they're moral, because they're ethical, because the FDA told them. Oh, none of those things. It's because they don't want to lose money. None of this is nefarious, it's just the way economics works. It doesn't need to be nefarious, is what I'm saying. It doesn't need to be a conspiracy. It's just basic economics. There's just a broken economic and regulatory regime when it comes to vaccines that has resulted in the reality in which we live today. Make pharma companies liable for the injuries vaccines cause again, I assure you, this whole thing will correct itself very, very quickly.
Right. So the evil started with the 1986 Act because they're no longer liable for the damages and all those things. So it's an economic interest, right? So, Mr. Siri, now we'll move on to the scale of damage that the Indian girls might have with this HPV vaccine. So the government plans to inject 12 million girls per year. So for example, 12 million girls this year and the next year. So based on the serious side effects prevalence percentage, what is the scale of damage that we're going to see over the years?
Well, if the data is accurate that even without the Gardasil vaccine, you're going to see a decline in cervical cancer, then what benefit do you have? Then if that's reflective, if that data, right, meaning if the rate of cervical cancer was going to continue to decline with or without the vaccine anyway, and it was going to be the same, then all you've done is introduce a product that's going to cause harm. And one harm is one harm too many. And even according to their own data, it takes injecting a lot of girls to prevent, even according to them, one case of cervical cancer. In which case, what do you have to, it doesn't need to cause a lot of harm to be upside down from a public health benefit perspective.
Right, because I was doing some calculations. I'll share the data with you. So what I calculated was there are 70,000 deaths from cervical cancer in India every year. So 70,000 out of a population of 70 crores, 70 crores. So which is probably 1,500 deaths from cervical cancer when we compare it with 12 million girls. Now, when 12 million girls are being given this HPV vaccine to prevent the 1,500 deaths from cervical cancer, and if we assume that the 2.3 percentage of serious side effects is correct, then 12 million multiplied by 2.3%, it gives me something close to 300,000. I think specifically 276,000 girls are going to seriously get affected with diseases that they have mentioned, like rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune thyroiditis, celiac disease, type 1 diabetes, hyperthyroid, IBS, multiple sclerosis, optic neuritis, psoriasis, and lupus, and all that's gonna happen. I mean, like 276,000 girls are going to get life-threatening diseases just to save the 1,500 deaths from cervical cancer, which is
If it even does that.
right. Right,
And
we're not.
and obviously, I don't know what the areas in which they plan to vaccinate are, and I don't know what the state is, but from to the extent they're deploying resources, if there isn't, for example, good screening that occurs, there isn't good GYN care, gynecological care where they're doing regular pap smears, invest in that. That at least is not going to potentially give you dysautonomia, neuropathies, an autoimmune disease, all kinds of real serious adverse reactions. It would be, of course, if they really, really had confidence in this product, that the benefits outweighed the risk, what they would do is they would have one group get the vaccine, because they're not giving it to all the girls, if that's the numbers, and then follow an equal number of girls that don't get the vaccine, and follow them all for the next 20 years,
Right.
and see what's the differential in health outcomes, the actual, real differential in health outcomes. Based on the available data and what I've looked at, my opinion is that you're going to find that the girls that didn't get this product ended up far better off than the girls that got the product.
Exactly. That's what I believe as well. And based on the data. And it's been 20 years now. The Gardasil launched in 2006 and it's 2026 and they should have the data now. But they won't present that, right? All right.
This is the thing. There is data. I have it in my book in the footnote.
Right.
And what I'm telling you is the data shows, and look, it's like every other vaccine. They introduced the vaccine. Oh, deaths went down. The vaccine reduced the deaths. But they never look, well, what was happening before the vaccine?
Yeah,
was it going down? Oh, okay. So now what you need to do is not look at it going down. You have to ask yourself, how much more is it going down? How much more? That is the measure. And that's from the data that's available. And it's in my book. You don't see that. So what do they do instead? They say, oh, well, let's just look after we introduced it. Oh, look, there's a decline. Big deal. There was a decline before also, and it was faster. So it's like an analogy would be you have somebody is I've never tried this before. Let's see if I can mess it up. Okay, somebody is digging for a certain commodity, okay, and every day they extract 1 pound of it. Every day, 1 pound. So somebody comes and says, "I got this amazing digging equipment," and they sell it to you, right? And it might cause harm because it's destroying things, and they start using it. Now they're bringing out of the ground 1/2 pound, and they're like, "See, you get 1/2 pound a day." You'd be like, "Well, wait a second, buddy. I was getting 1 pound before this," right? It's like ignoring the history. It doesn't make sense. But when it's a religion, that's the way these folks operate.
Vaccines.
Amen.
All right. So there's a serious concern about infertility. There have been many doctors in India who have been saying this HPV vaccine contains aluminum, it contains polysorbate 80, it contains sodium borate, and potentially this vaccine carries risk of ovarian failure and infertility. This is what some of the doctors who are researching into vaccines have been claiming. But now the mainstream medical doctors have been dismissing this and saying that we have no evidence that the vaccine causes infertility, and especially we are really concerned because Bill Gates, the guy who funds this vaccine, had said that if we make good vaccines, we can reduce the world population by 15%. So I am really concerned about the fertility issues in the girls that's going to happen in the next 15 years. What is your take about this based on the data available?
I'll give you a lawyer answer, okay? If the product is so safe, why does it need immunity to liability for the injuries that it supposedly is not causing? If it's so safe, why does it need immunity? Why? Drugs that hurt a lot of people, that's small products, they don't have immunity. Cars don't have immunity. Planes don't have immunity. Knives don't have immunity. Even guns, for the most part, don't have immunity. Very narrow immunity using the commission of a crime in the U.S., for example. Why? The product they tell you is safe. And the Gardasil vaccine, the HPV vaccine, has been around, like you just said, for over 2 decades. You still don't know it's safe enough to lift the immunity? Come on. Really? It's been 20 years. Here's what I would say to any parent out there, okay? If you're going to give your child a product, usually you're going to check the reports. You're going to go buy them a car. What are you going to do? You're probably going to go check the crash test report. You want to check it out, right? And if you went to go check out a car and the car dealer said to you, "Hey, look, I'm going to sell you this car, but just so you know, you can never sue us. Doesn't matter how poorly it's designed. You can't just sue us saying we made it better." You'd say, "Get the hell out of here. There's no way I'm putting my kid in that car."
Yeah.
You would say, hey, I want you to waive that. I want you to waive that. Strike that. You would take that contract to buy the car and you would take that sentence and you would cross it out and you would say, "I'll buy the car, but I want you to erase the sentence that says that I can't sue you. If this thing could have been made safer, my kid wouldn't die. My kid wouldn't burn alive in this car."
Right.
Do the same with vaccines. ICanDecide.org, which is a nonprofit that my firm that funds many of the policy vaccine lawsuits that my firm does, Informed Consent Action Network. On their website, there's a form letter, okay, that you can send, in this instance, to Merck, if it's Gardasil, and say, "Hey, Merck, thank you for making this product, okay? Please sign at the bottom to say that if my kid gets injured, I can sue you for those harms. You say it's safe, so I assume you should have no problem signing this."
Right.
Send it to that. See if they send you back a signed copy.
You will.
And if they don't, ask yourself why.
Right, you will wait forever for that. It's not going to come back. Right. So the next question is about the legal aspect. So parents have a concern that if they decline the vaccine, will the school suspend my child? And if yes, then what's the solution that I need to do?
I don't know the laws in India. I'm so sorry. I mean, you're talking about India right now, right?
Yeah.
You must have a lot of confidence in my ability as a lawyer. I don't know what the rules are in India. You should talk. I'm sure there's resources there, folks you can talk to.
Right. All right. This might be a little personal question, and if you don't mind it, I'll ask it. And if you feel comfortable, you can answer that. So, based on the current knowledge about vaccines, if you had a baby born today, would you ever vaccinate him?
Well, look, I mean, I think as a general rule, especially as a lawyer, okay, even if I knew nothing about immunology, vaccinology, virology, infectious disease, which unfortunately that's most of what's on most medical texts, most of what's on my shelves, I would at least want to make sure that the company stands behind their product. I
Right.
want products that the company is confident and stands behind it. If the company won't stand behind the product, forget anything else. You got to ask yourself, is it wise for me to use that product? Is it wise for me to ingest, wear that product? If the very company that makes it won't stand behind it, I think it's a very reasonable, secular, non-religious approach to these products. The other thing I'll say is this. For some reason, the script has become upside down with vaccines. We'll go back to the car analogy. You go to the car dealer and you say, hey, is this car safe? If the car dealer turns to you, the car salesman turns to you and says, hey, listen, you prove to me it's not safe. Otherwise, you got to buy this car. You would say, what? You say, that's crazy. But that's the way doctors operate with vaccines. You walk in, you say, hey, doctor, is it safe? And they'll look at you and they'll say, well, you show me it causes autism. You show me it causes neurological autoimmune issues. Prove to me it causes harm. What the heck? Why do I have to prove it? You got to prove to me it's safe. No, you prove to me it's not safe. Otherwise, you got to inject it. I mean, that's the, so, you know, from a non-medical perspective, just as a consumer, I want a product where the company stands behind it. And I want a product where those who are trying to push it to me actually can affirm that it's safe with real data, real science, not by gaslighting you and attacking you and name calling you and so forth.
Exactly, exactly. Now, the next question is about the autism. So, looking at the statistics, as the dosage of autism increased in the United States, the rates of autism went up. Most medical doctors have a belief that this is just a correlation, it's not a causation. And they often dismiss this association by saying that correlation doesn't means causation. And so when we go on the CDC website, earlier it used to say that vaccines do not cause autism, and now I think they have changed it to that we have no evidence that vaccines may not cause autism. It's kind of crazy legal language, which the problem is that the consumer does not know these language that they use, and they think that they don't have an evidence that it won't cause autism, and so they just assume it's safe. So what's your view about the data that shows about autism prevalence and the vaccine
Yeah.
doses?
Well, there's certainly a correlation. We've gone from, as we talked in the US, and I'm sure it's similar in India, 3 injections but on or before first birthday in 1986 to 29 or 19 now. At the same time in the US, we've gone for under 10% of kids, according to the data, having a chronic health issue to now over 40%, some stat over 50, and often multiple chronic health conditions. And what are those chronic health conditions that are exploded? They're often conditions, almost all of them, are related to some form of immune system dysregulation. Even autism has markers of immune system dysregulation amongst children that are autistic. And so, you know, if you want to rule out that a vaccine doesn't cause an issue, well, one, you want a good clinical trial, but they never did that. So then you have to rely on post-licensure studies published in the literature. And so they tell you, they assure you, they have thoroughly and completely debunked the claim that vaccines cause autism with endless study. Apparently, a mountain of studies so large that it's blinding. It's like the Himalayas, okay? That's how many studies there are. Well, and this goes back to Vaccines Amen, which is on behalf of ICANN, the nonprofit I told you about earlier, we sent a formal legal demand called a Freedom of Information Act request in the United States to the CDC, and we said, hey, CDC, on your website, you say vaccines do not cause autism. Okay. please give us the studies that show that the 15 injections of 5 different vaccines given in the first 6 months of life don't cause autism.
Right.
Surely you have those. They gave us nothing. We sued them in federal court. As we led up to the date of the hearing, they finally gave us a list of 20 studies. Problem is, 19 of them have nothing to do with the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life. It's either MMR vaccine given after 1 year or later, or an ingredient that's not in any of those vaccines. The 20th study did look at whether DTaP does or doesn't cause autism, and it could only find one study. It was a review by the Institute of Medicine. And that one study found there was a correlation between DTaP vaccine and autism. Mm-hmm. So I remember telling the DOJ attorney, I said, you sure you want to settle with these 20 studies? I said, there's lawsuits about the vaccines in the first 6 months of life. These studies include one study on those vaccines, and it shows a correlation. That's how they settled it. Oh, I signed on behalf of my client, the Department of Justice, which is the federal, lawyers that represent the federal government here, signed on behalf of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. The judge entered as an order of the court, and there it is. Where else can I go? And this is what I mean. There's what they tell the public, and then there's what they have to admit when their back is against the wall in a federal lawsuit, when they have no choice, because they can't make up studies. I'll know it's fake. They had to give me a list. And that list proved that they don't have the studies to show that vaccines don't cause autism. I know that's a cognitive dissonance, but again, go to the I Can Decide website or read my book, pull up the court order, read all 20 studies yourself, look at it for yourself. And you can also watch me depose Dr. Plotkin, Dr. Edwards, the world's leading vaccinologist, on this exact point as well. They don't have the data to show it. And by the way, the studies that do exist are very concerning. For example, there's only one study of hepatitis B vaccine and autism that I know of. Only one. Galler and Goodman at the University of Stony Brook, and it found that children that got Hep B vaccine in the first month of life had 3 times the rate of autism compared to kids that got no Hep B vaccine in the first month of life. The only study out there, and it was statistically significant.
Right. So the next question is about vaccinated children versus in unvaccinated children. It said that there's not a single study done and published. But you mentioned in one of your books that there is a study that was done by a scientist who was pro-vax earlier, and when he did that study, he realized that there is something wrong with the vaccines, but it never got published. So can you tell that story to our audience so that they know what goes behind the scenes and why they never get the truth?
I can sum up the story in 2 words. Vaccines, amen. Seriously. Look, that's the way it goes. There's about a dozen studies out there that compare kids with no vaccines with kids or 1 or more vaccines, and they all pretty much are consistent. The kids that got the vaccines have multiple times the rate of chronic health issues, the very health issues that have exploded. I mean, it's consistent. And when you have studies that are consistently showing the same result, that's when the medical community usually comes around and goes, we got a problem. This is bad. Here, instead, they do the opposite. They attack the scientists that do those studies. They go after their licensure. They go after the studies. Vaccines are vaccines, amen. What can I say?
Right. And a question that comes up from parents is that you are telling that the HPV vaccine is not safe, but since 50 years, we have eradicated polio, we have eradicated measles and mumps, and suddenly you are saying that the vaccines are not safe. How can we believe you?
Well, first of all, you have to, on a population level, if that's what we're talking about, you have to objectively look at the actual benefit. You got to start there. What's the actual benefit of this product? Okay? And so if you go, for example, to chapter 7 of my book, I take every vaccine, including polio, including measles, including rubella, and what I do is I look at how many people actually died in the United States in the year before the vaccine was introduced. And that starts giving you a real sense of what are we talking about? Are we talking, did millions die of measles? That's what they make you think. Hundreds of thousands? That's what they make you think. Tens of thousands? That sounds way too low. Thousands? Woo, that sounds way too low. But then when you look at it, you realize actually 400 or so Americans died a year from measles at a time when everybody in America got measles. That's 1 in 450,000 Americans. That's not what Americans are led to believe. That's not what people around the world are led to believe about measles. Then I go through, so that's first thing I do in my book. So you can get a sense of, okay, what was the actual mortality? Second, like Gardasil, you got to look what was happening before they had the vaccine. Was mortality going down already? Measles, for example, between 1900 and the introduction of a measles vaccine in the US, mortality declined by over 98%. Why would that not have continued? Okay? So you got to put the benefits in perspective. What were the actual number of deaths? What was the decline? How much did it accelerate that decline? And then you can get to an actual number. And when you look at that number, it's really, really small. I don't want to ruin the surprise. It's in my book. Then you have to say, okay, that's mortality. Well, what about serious harms from the diseases? I address that to some degree in chapter 8 of my book. In particular, we look at polio, because that's the one everybody's freaked out about, polio. Okay? It's going to take too long to discuss it, but the data is very clear. And I don't use data from like controversial sources. I'm using it from like Alfred Sabin, the inventor of the oral polio vaccine, and you can read it. Then on the other side of the coin, you're like, okay, so that's the benefit. It's really, really small to the degree there is one, right, for many of the vaccines. What's the harm? Well, then you can look at that in chapter 10, 11, 12, and then you can start getting a sense. And for most vaccines, I think it's actually very easy to show that the harms based on the data outweigh the risks and outweigh the benefit, excuse me, outweigh the benefit. And so, but look, at the end of the day, as an attorney, my focus is really on civil and individual rights. I think people should be free to take products that might be harmful. That's freedom. You take risks every day. You take risks driving your car. You take risks, engaged in all kinds of activities. And people should be free to take those risks because that's what freedom is. You don't want the government that constantly is policing you because that's destructive to liberty. So, just because a vaccine causes more harm than good doesn't mean that I think it should be outlawed or banned or anything like that. There's a lot of things that cause more harm than good. People should be able to make their choice. That's the idea of freedom and liberty. So, but maybe I would just end by saying that with that said, before you make that choice, it really, really behooves everybody to get a bit educated about it. Mm-hmm. Because the number of parents who I have had to sit in a room with who've been, crying hysterically, devastated, saying, how did I do this to my child? How did I do it? And I always say the same thing almost. I say, look, how did you know better? You were told over and over, safe and effective. You trusted the medical community. You trusted the federal health and state health authorities. You did what a good parent should do. You did the right thing based on the knowledge you had.
Yeah.
And it's sad and it's heartbreaking. And I wish they did know more beforehand because they might have made a more informed decision. Mm-hmm. You can read my book to get that knowledge, which is kind of like a crash test report. You could also go to iCanDecide.org that has a Get Informed section where you can read there as well. And there are other resources. So what I implore everybody in India to do is vaccinate, don't vaccinate, make up your own mind. But please, first, look at the underlying. Take a moment before you engage in this medical procedure. I bet if you were going to have your kid undergo a surgery, before you buy them a car, before you engage in various other things that have risks, you do some research. Do your research here. Don't just believe, think.
Right. I have just two more questions left.
Sure.
one is about the doctors and the lawyers, because my audience, my audience has all legal experts, doctors watching these videos, parents watching these videos, and all those patriots who want to know what's really going on behind the scene are also watching these videos. So I have for those two group of people, one for the lawyers and one for the doctors. What are their moral and ethical responsibilities? Because the doctors, they often say that the government has launched the HPV vaccine. It is going to prevent cancer on all the girls. You must take it, and there are no side effects. There is no infertility. Just take it, and there is no side effect. This is what the doctors say. And the lawyers, they, because they do not have the medical education about the vaccinations, they are just watching what's going on. So, what is your message to these doctors and these lawyers?
So for the doctors, there is an ethical responsibility that every doctor has, as far as I know, and this is global as far as I know, to not give a product that has not been properly trialed. It is unethical. It is unethical to inject a human being, including children, with a product that was not properly trialed for licensure. And it does not take much work. It's really easy to see that the Gardasil vaccine was not properly trialed. All they have to know is that the control group got an injection of aluminum adjuvant. That's it. They don't even need to know that there were harms in the trial. They don't need to know the 2.3%. On that basis alone, knowing the trial was defective, it is unethical, categorically unethical, for a doctor to administer this product, and they should decline to do so until a clinical trial that was properly conducted is conducted and they see that data and they know that it exists. That's the doctors. As for the lawyers, for the most part, as you know, because the immunity granted, the lawyers have been neutered. For the most part, there's not much they can do. In the normal situation, there's a product, cause injury, you sue the company, you hold them accountable, you hold the doctors accountable, and let me tell you, then the doctors and the pharma company and the health authorities, they all act very differently very quickly. But, until it costs them money, the conduct doesn't get conformed, sadly.
So, what should the legal experts do to initiate a movement that this immunity is lifted off?
Well, that's a political thing, That's politics. That's getting the politicians to do it. And, if India is anything like the U.S., there's over 1,000 pharma lobbyists and medical lobbyists here in Congress, just the federal. And there's, in the state level, and there's zero, as far as I know, vaccine safety lobbyists. So I don't know how you get that. But one thing I think lawyers can do is they can help expose the truth, and they can do that through demands on the medical authorities in India, demanding that they produce the documents to support their claims, like we do here in the U.S., and then making that information public and available. Again, similar to a lot of the legal work that we do, as supported by ICANN.
Right. And the final question is about censorship. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, I saw that the rights of free speech were stripped off. I'm sure you would have noticed your accounts and your posts getting off internet. And when I made videos on my YouTube channel was deleted entirely. My Instagram live was stopped, and I was banned. My Facebook was banned, and I was almost banned on all social media when I was spreading this information about the COVID vaccines and the related risk of getting myocarditis and all those things. And then I also launched a book, The Vaccine Crime Report, to educate people about the vaccines. And then I was banned from basically all platforms, and I had to create new accounts. And now I want to know, like, what is my role to get the accountability from these social medias?
Accountability from the social media companies is very difficult because they're private companies, and private companies, generally should, have the right to decide what content they want. Now, it shouldn't be done at the behest of government. That is a violation, but proving that is a difficulty. With that said, I'll say this. Governments, companies, they don't need to censor stuff that's nonsense. That's not true.
Yeah,
You went on there, a doctor, if you were going on and saying, and you were saying, hey, look, aliens are coming down and blah, 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 not going to censor you. You can say the craziest, wackiest, nuttiest things you want. In fact, had you said stuff about vaccines that just were totally crazy, probably wouldn't have censored you, okay? But when you're saying things that are true, that's when people get scared. When you say, oh, this person did X crime and it's true, whoa, then they need to censor you. Then the government wants to censor you. So when the government and the big companies are engaged in censorship, it usually means you've hit on the nerve of something that's true, because that's what they're scared of. They're not scared of nonsense. They're scared of the truth first. And that's true, by the way, historically. Censorship by government always happens when it's true. That doesn't happen typically when it's not true. Second is that, yes, it was ridiculous. I think one of the first things I ever posted about this that got censored was I literally took documents I got from, there were Pfizer documents, and I posted those documents with, I think, a quote from the document itself, and that got censored as misinformation. Pfizer's own COVID-19 vaccine documents. It was incredible.
Oh my God.
Because I was very careful. I typically didn't make statement. I just, posted whatever in any event. So yes, it's difficult. I mean, look, hopefully, Elon Musk buying X was a milestone, because had he not done that, there's a very good chance that all the other social media companies would have just kept going down the route of censorship. So thank God that he bought it. Thank God that he has, had a respect for the First Amendment right to free speech. And so hopefully we have more patriots, more individuals who respect the right to free speech, who become and get in control of these social media companies.
Wonderful. This was an enlightening discussion, and I'm honored that I have the hero without a cape, Mr. Aaron Siri, joining us today. Thank you so much for joining, Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you.